I'm ready to be told, time for secrets to unfold. It's our time to come of age, time for truth to turn the page. I wanna be inside the dark, live within a question mark. Will be a friend or foe? Tell me now. You need to know. Need to know. You need to know. Need to know.
The Extraordinary Phenomenon Investigations Council presents Epic Voyages. Come join us as we enter and experience the great mysteries of the world with tonight's host,
Robert McKenzie.
Too much to learn, you say. Cover up is fine, that's your plan, not mine. I'm ready to be told, time for secrets to unfold. It's our time to come of age, time for truth to turn the page. I wanna be inside the dark, live within a question mark. Will be a friend or foe? Tell me now. You need to know.
Robert McKenzie, and I'm your host for tonight's program. We have a very special guest for you tonight, but first let me give you a quick background of tonight's topic. I'm speaking to you from a city located about 30 miles northeast of Dallas, Texas. That city is Rockwall, Texas. Rockwall is situated on the eastern shore of Lake Ray Hubbard. That's a lake made in the 1960s by damming the East Fork of the Trinity River. Rockwall's name comes from a pattern of rockwall formations that was discovered in 1852, about 10 years after the first settlers arrived in this area. 3 men were involved in that discovery, and they each wanted to name the new city after himself. As you might expect, they couldn't agree. So they resolved the dilemma by agreeing to name the settlement after the mysterious rock wall formations. And over the subsequent years, many people have been involved in exploring and researching those formations. Some believe the walls are man-made. Others are certain that they are the result of natural geological processes. Our guest tonight is one of the leading researchers of the wall phenomenon. He has been investigating the walls for many, many years. And he's a local Rockwall architect and is intimately familiar with all facets of this extremely interesting mystery. If you want to view photos of the walls, go to www.anarchaeology.com, and that's spelled ANARCHAEOLOGY.com, and click on the section labeled Quivira, Rockwall, Texas, and that's spelled Quivira, and don't worry, it's on the left side of the page, easy to find. Okay, let's get started. Our host tonight is Mr. John Lindsey. Good evening, John, and welcome to the world of Epic Voyagers. Are you ready to start?
Good evening. Yes, it's a pleasure to be with you. Sure.
Well, thanks for joining us. So my first question to get us going is, when was this wall discovered and how was it discovered?
Okay, as you have pointed out already, the 3 gentlemen that came down from Illinois to start a farming community were T.U. Wade, B.F. Boydston, and Mr. Stevenson. They arrived in 1851 and started setting up house there. And as you have said, they were each wanting to name the new town after themselves. And as a consequence of digging a well on the T.U. Wade parcel of land, which is right off 66 there in Rockwall, they discovered the wall. And in doing so, in further digs, they decided to name the town Rockwall based on that rock wall and get their settlements between themselves settled and I suppose get on with life. So that was the first modern discovery of the wall. We know from ancient material that the local Indians were aware of that a couple of hundred years ago. It used to appear, at the time the Wades were there, the outcroppings appeared above ground 2 or 3 feet, looking somewhat like fences with capstones on them. Later on, as it became a cotton community, these walls were taken down, and the capstones and all were actually moved across the river to the western side of the Trinity River to set up fences to keep the cattle from falling in the canyon of the river. In Rockwall becoming a farming community, they moved all the cattle out and across the river. So that's why some of the capstones showed up later on over there with some research. I will point out, jumping ahead of time to the present time, a few years back I spoke with Mary Patty Wade Gibson now. She's the granddaughter of T.U. Wade, the founder. And was talking to her. They have letters from that time and all, and the digs that were made after that, up until 1906, exploring more of the wall. Well, I'm just going to read here what she told me in these interviews from the letters she had. She described to me additional digging her grandfather and other men did at the home site. In this description were cubicles or rooms constructed of stone, which you could walk through and would reach a quarter, which seemed to run in a direction into the hill that the downtown square sits above. She told me of an incident in 1906 of 2 men, and she couldn't remember their names, digging out the corridor, which is apparently filled with erosion. Their intent was to get into a major cavity under the town square that was known to be there, and of course their motive was looking for gold, but I don't think that panned out that way, no pun intended. But in that dig, they discovered that the ceilings of the corridor were steep slope, Gothic type arch ceilings. That's much like the vaulted ceilings of the Mayans down in Mexico, south of us, which on my first investigations were finding quite a few similarities. But going back to the discovery of the wall and the time, that's was who did it and what they were doing, which is a lot of information came from that time. Anyway.
Okay, back up a second. You said that there were capstones. And as I said in my intro, I live here in the area, and I've looked around, I've driven around in my car, looked at your map, looked at other people's maps, and I can't see any. I mean, I live within about half a mile of where one's supposed to be. So the capstones are gone. And where
they're
was
all
the
gone.
original? Where was the original well?
Top of the walls. The original well is right off of 66, right above the lake, going up the hill into Rockwall, about halfway up the hill. It sets an elevation of about 550 feet. Let's see. Crossing the river on Highway 66, which runs somewhat parallel to I-30, and just north of 66 there, just above the new Walmart store there, is the T.U. Wade farm, still in the family's possession. And that's where the original well was dug, and the further diggings finding the corridors and so forth.
Okay. What have previous investigations revealed about the walls, and what do you think about, what are your observations of those investigations?
All right, I've got all this information I've collected over the years of all the investigations, and I can tell you there's, of all the investigations going back to the to the mid-1800s to up to the 1950s, 60s, those who've looked at it, there's about a 50-50 split, and who was saying it was real and who was saying it was artificial. Now, And the results I dug up on all of them. The first time it was determined to be a natural phenomenon was stated by Dr. Hill from the University of Texas Geological Department in 1901, I believe it was, and get my dates straight here. And he attributed the walls in Rockwall to be just a derivative or a spinoff of the Balcones Fault, which was supposed to run through Rockwall. Well, it was determined back in 1959 by Dr. Lonsdale, as well as others that are investigating the Balcones Fault. It doesn't even come to Rockwall. It stops about 100 miles south of us in Hill County. So we're not a part of that. Dr. Hill never came to Rockwall to take a look at them. There were other scientists, and one of the most famous archaeologists in the world who brought photographs and movies to the world of archaeology, came to Rockwall and looked at the time down in Wales to see the wall and did some investigation there and determined that the wall looked very similar to walls he was digging up in North Africa. That was Dr. Byron Kuhn Prorook, who was out of the University of Chicago. Anyway, he did come look at it and made these statements once it was going to come back, but never did. So from there on, the controversy, that was 1925. From there on, the controversy continued on. And in my research, I find it's about 50-50 split. But the ones who basically says it's a natural phenomenon either never came here or never brought forth any evidence for us, whereas the others, such as Mr. Sanders and many others, as well as Dr. Lonsdale, determined other things about the stone, about the wall. And certainly when I got involved in it, they apparently had not seen the same things that I was seeing.
So these guys just debunked it without looking. The guys just debunked it without looking at it, huh?
Pretty much. It was controversial from the beginning. There are several reasons. As of now, it's very controversial because of what the dates are or leading us to, which is older than they're supposed to be, and we'll get into that a little later. Okay. But the other thing was the fear that the large landowners around Rockwall come to find out why I could not get on properties to go down in wells and take photographs of supposed windows and so forth. And after I finally dug it out of them, they were scared that the Antiquities Commission of Texas were going to take over their land and shut things down, which is totally erroneous. That's not the way it works. But that's been one of the myths out there which stopped us, stopped people from looking at it and discrediting credible people who did make statements about it. So you do have a force out there of those who apparently do not want the facts revealed because they're just too scary, I guess.
Okay, let's circle back around to that in a minute.
Okay.
But tell me what started you on this? How did you get involved? And
okay. Actually, I've been involved and interested in archaeology as a kid. I grew up down in East Texas, and at the time, Lake Sam Rayburn and Toledo Bend were coming in. Archaeologists were coming out of the University of Texas and Oklahoma and coming down excavating Indian sites where the lake was going to be and moving those. So as a kid, I was in the Boy Scouts and got involved in summer projects of helping with the digs down there. So early on, had a passion for archaeology and ancient history. And all my life I've collected arrowheads and artifacts and going across the United States, and it's just been an interest, a passion of mine. In 1992, 91, I came back from New England after being up there 6 years, back to Rockwall, and an architect friend of mine asked me, he said, could we get a dig in Rockwall? Could we check out the wall? And I said, well, I don't know why not. Know the area. I'll look around and see what we can do. And so it spurred my interest. I just assumed that the wall was an old Indian wall, or didn't know. Had not looked real close at it, knew where it was at the time, was a kid. Later on, I did move to Rockwall and finished high school there. So after coming back, he challenged me, so we took it on, and I early on got real interested in it, and just wanted to know what the facts were, and hopefully could get a dig going to check it out myself. And that's where it started, and that was in 93, and it got away from me, and that's primarily what I've done since then, and keep myself going in my design business to support that, I suppose. But that's becoming my background and got involved. I was educated in a scientific background, so I knew the scientific process about how to go about this. And I've been fortunate to have help, support from universities, from professors, from scientists, from people all over the United States and the world, as well as local friends and there that just gave me the support I needed to do this. For the first few years, I kept it very, very quiet, and because I did not want to attract any attention. I knew if I were going to start mapping this wall and see where it was at, I was going to be crossing lands of big landowners that they wouldn't want me doing that. Being a local land planner and all, and being out planning areas for subdivisions, things like this, gave me the opportunity to be out there and take private notice as I went along. But most of my mapping of the wall came about from 93 till about 96, up to 97, where I would go out at night and take my 3-foot steel rebar, my hammer, and my U.S. geological topographical map that I still have, and a stick pin. And that's how I would note it on this topographical map, which was very detailed in that it has 1-foot topographical information on it, all the old well sites, and just everything historical about it. So I used that as my palette and stuck little holes every 3 feet on this map of where I would encounter the wall. Now, there are places that it would come above ground, but most of it, the 20 some odd miles around it, took me 3 years. I'd go out on rainy, stormy nights when I wouldn't be noticed, and some nights I may get a few feet, and some nights I may get 200 yards, just depending. In doing so, I learned by being out there in full moons, I could learn to read the ground where the wall was because it glowed at night in the full moon. We'll get into here in a bit why.
The wall glowed?
So, and I as well got to learn the vegetation in it. So that spurred me on to my documentation of the wall location. Now, along with that, in my research, I had wells I could go look at, which got me started, and the wall appeared down in the wells. And so I could document that location. In some of the early Dallas newspapers, they had some locations for me. So I would go out and look at them, and those would be starting points that I could connect the dots to by following along and nailing the rebar in the ground from 12 to 18 inches would hit the top of the wall. And there was no mistake when you hit it. Anyway, I found out that the early settlers learned early on that if they dug a well on the uphill side, that'd be the east side of the rock wall where it appeared, they could capture water and have well water within 30 feet down, which is pretty shallow and good water. And of course, that was the underground water flow that was being caught by the wall. So consequently, I had this U.S. geological map with all these well sites on it. I could go to a pier, look down in and document the wall. And so there's where I got a lot of my pinholes. And the rest was just going through at night, clandestinely as it would be, so I could get a mapping, a surround of this wall, which I completed. And I don't know what else is in the middle or outside. We found some other locations. And so that's how that happened. Down in the, at that time, neighborhoods on the western side of the ridge, about halfway down the hill where the original well is, there were new subdivisions. I knew the engineer that did the planning of these, and knowing where the wall was, knew how the topography would run naturally for the roads. So consequently, no one ever hit the wall in building homes and so forth. Now, at night, documenting this, is when I had to take my chicken bones or beef bones there and entice the dogs of yards I might have to cross to
John,
get my
you do
pinpoint.
know this is Texas. You do know this is Texas.
Yes, I know. And I know I shouldn't have been doing what I was doing, but that was the only way I was going to achieve, and I wasn't hurting anyone. I was doing something that needed to be done, and I know that. But that's why I kept it quiet. And I guess I'm fortunate.
Yeah, you are.
But nevertheless, like I said, I had a strong passion I wanted to investigate this, and when it became public, it came out in the newspaper. That's one of the first statements that I made, that this is what I wanted to do, and do it like it had never been done before, because I had the scientific knowledge to go about the process, and at the time had the research to do so, and as it turned out, got the backing of a lot of help and guidance and a lot of knowledge to be learned, and that was what paid off for me was the knowledge, the learning, all of the elements that go along with the wall. But,
okay,
that's how the wall was mapped and many things found.
One of the listeners wants to know, and I know the answer to this, but I'll ask you anyway, is are they accessible now, and can you just walk up and look at them? And that'll lead me into another question to you after you answer that.
Okay, the first part I missed that for some static. Would you repeat that, please?
Yeah, are the walls accessible, readily accessible right now, and can you just walk up and look at them?
No, especially now they're not. I know where the wells are, but now the attention's been gotten. That's I could probably take you out to some that you wouldn't be disturbed to look in it. We covered up the site that we dug, and we had to because it was on private land, and they had cattle, and we had a very dangerous situation there. Those stones, some of them weighed 2 tons apiece, and so it was a dangerous situation. We had to take care. So when we got through, we covered that up, and so I do know where some outcroppings are, which is along some of the interior streets of neighborhoods and all that you can see, but there's really, at this time, any place that I'm aware of that you can actually go look and see the walls. They're just under the ground.
Okay. I'm going to get you to do one thing for me right here. For those who can't look at the photos, can you give me or give us a verbal description of what you found? You dug down about 35 feet, is that right, in some of the places?
Our dig went down, 35 feet. We did some borings down to 60 feet. I just ran out of money. It was hard, long digging, and we were really getting interesting things as we dug down. Well, let me make one statement that before we get into that dig, that's phenomenon about this wall and getting it mapped. It turns out that not only did I find the wall, the tops of the wall, original tops of the wall, all appear at 550-foot elevation, and that's well documented on this geological map. Rockwall has really rolling hills. It's just a squeeze, a crunch of geology there, and a lot of up and down. Well, you would think if it was a natural phenomenon that the wall would be going along with the strata. As it turns out, it does not. At the top of the wall, every elevation is 550 feet. We learned this early on in some overlays, and it panned out to be so as I went on with my documentation. So that told me that there was something unique about the wall. It was flat and level, the top of it. It did not roll with the strata that was in the surround. Another aspect, being an artist, studying architecture and science and all, is applied the what's known as the golden section. It's one of the oldest ancient formulas to mankind, and that formula presents. It's a formula that presents the most pleasing proportions. It appears in nature, in music, art. It's throughout in architecture, in just about everything. And so I applied that formula to the surround of this wall, and it fit it perfectly. So that was another interesting piece of data that showed up that later on becomes even more interesting. But I just wanted to point that out. That was learned early on. And anyway, bringing us up to the dig of 99 to 2001. As we went down, I found one of these so-called windows within about 3 foot down. These are the windows. They're openings in the wall, and there's many described. There's some I want to take pictures of, and as a matter of fact, I did get some photographs found some old photographs of cameras that were dropped into some of the wells, and got corners of these which showed architectural features such as headers and skewbacks for balancing and so forth. 2x2 windows, they called them. These were found back in the 30s and 40s. But in my encounter, one of the first things I found was about 3 feet down was an arched opening about 2 feet long, and even it had a row of stones arched with a capstone, with the keystone right in the middle where it should be. Well, certainly that got excitement. And further digging, as you get on this website and look at pictures, we found more of these openings with proper headers and so forth. It got on down to, I found a big dish out in the stone. It must have been 9 feet tall and 7 feet wide. At the bottom of it, the platform, and this would be maybe 12, 14 feet down at the top of it. Well, going on down, there was a flat point there that the stones came out and surrounded. Well, now we're down into blue shale now, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I find this sandy loam, almost like beach sand, behind these stones. So I dig that out, and that's not supposed to be there if this thing is millions of years old and sedimentary event happening. That just shouldn't have been there. So anyway, as I dug on down below that, I began to run in at about 29 or 30 feet, steps that wrap around, big steps. And I got down to the third step, 1, 2, 3, steps that were about a foot tall in their riser and 18 inches